everybody, over the course of the past few weeks, I've looked at everything that has to do with Jeskai Convoke in Standard. We've looked at a deck tech and card choices in the deck, the overall strategy of the deck, how to play the deck, how to sideboard against the deck, against the top 10 most popular decks in Standard, different flex slots and builds of the deck, nuances and weird play patterns of the deck. And so I wanted to combine all of those things into one video, one big deep dive for you to enjoy. Enjoy. So this is Jeskai Convoke. What this deck is essentially attempting to do is play a bunch of cheap creatures that you can either capitalize on or make artifacts, so you can gleeful demolition them to be able to get a bunch of creatures very, very early in the game, to then use Warden of the Inner Sky to get really, really big and apply a ton of pressure and be able to select your draws, to be able to play Knight Errant of Eos to be able to dig through your deck, and to be able to play Imitating Recruiter to attack for a ton. It's all about getting a ton of small creatures and then using those 3 cards to be able to just capitalize on that. The lands, there's not much to look at. They're just a bunch of lands that enter untapped in the first few turns because those are the turns that matter. But let's start with Novice Inspector. It's a 1/2 for 1 when it enters Investigate, which means create a clue token. Now, sometimes we're popping this clue token. Sometimes we're just using it as an artifact for gleeful demolition. Spyglass Siren, I'm skipping over Warden on purpose. Spyglass Siren is a 1-mana 1/1 with flying. When it enters, create a map token. Again, for a similar reason we're playing Novice Inspector, it creates an artifact which we can then gleeful demolition. Clockwork Percussionist is a 1-mana 1/1 with haste. When it dies, exile the top card of your library. You may play it till end of your next turn. So this allows us to dig through our deck, but also it's an artifact in and of itself. Again, for you guessed it, Gleeful Demolition. Gleeful Demolition says destroy target artifact. If you controlled that artifact, create 3 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens. All of these cards allow us to play a bunch of creatures for really cheap, and sometimes 3 creatures for 1, being able to destroy one of the artifacts that are made with Novice Inspector, Spyglass Siren, or Clockwork Percussionist itself. The other card we're using to sort of flood the board is Resolute Reinforcements, which is a 2-mana 1/1 with flash, which is kind of interesting. It actually works really well with Protect the Negotiators in the sideboard and other instant speeds things that we could be doing. But when it enters, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So this just allows us to create 2 creatures for 1 card. It's 2 mana, so meh, but also it creates 2 creatures for 1 card, which is excellent. So between all of these cards, we're putting a ton of creatures on the board. So we capitalize on that by playing Warden of the Inner Sky, which is a 1-mana 1/2. When it has 3 or more counters on it, it has Flying and Vigilance, which is cool. So how do we get counters on it? Well, you can tap 3 artifacts and or creatures you control, put a +1/+1 counter on Warden of the Inner Sky, and scry 1 activate only as a sorcery. So what's cool about Warden of the Inner Sky is you can tap itself for it, but also you can tap the clue with Novice Inspector. You can tap the map with Spyglass Siren. You can tap all these tokens on Gleeful Demolition, etc., to make Warden of the Inner Sky very big and scry 1 a whole bunch of times, so you can sort of control the top card of your deck. And notice it has Vigilance when it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters. So it's a really good blocker and attacker. What's relevant about that as well is notice that clues don't require tapping to sacrifice it and draw a card. So there are times that you can tap the clue to pump up Warden of the Inner Sky and then still draw a card off the clue. That comes up quite a bit. Another way that we sort of capitalize on this is Imitating Recruiter. Imitating Recruiter has an adventure called Train Troops, which is pretty solid, creating 2 white knight creature tokens with Vigilance. If we're casting this, that means things have gone a little wrong, but I've won games by casting this, so don't worry about it. But Imitating Recruiter is a 3-mana 2/2. When it enters, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. So after we have a bunch of these creatures, we play an Imitating Recruiter. Everything is +1/+0, and we jam often for game. We're also playing Knight Errant of Eos. It is a 5-mana 4/4 with Convoke. Convoke meaning I can tap creatures and pay for mana of that creature's color, or generic mana. When it enters, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 creature cards with mana value X or less from among them, where X is the number of creatures that convoke Knight Errant of Eos. Put the reveal cards in your hand and then shuffle. So especially because a lot of cards in our deck are not very powerful in and of themselves, it's really important we're able to dig through our deck either with the Scries with Warden or digging through with Knight Errant of Eos in order to capitalize on these really cheap creatures with these 3 payoff creatures, and Knight Errant of Eos does that really well. Also, being a 4/4 body for effectively 0 mana very often is super, super relevant. Often a very powerful start and a very common start is play Novice Inspector or Spyglass Siren on turn 1, Gleeful Demolitioning that
Artifact on turn 2 and playing another 1-drop, and in the same turn on turn 2 playing Knight Errant of Eros, putting 2 cards in your hand, and you have an insane amount of power, and then you can follow it up with like an Imidane's Recruiter or something. Now we do have some non-creatures joining the party, mostly as removal, so we can get things out of the way and jam a whole bunch. We have Case of the Gateway Express. It is a 2-mana case. When it enters, choose target creature you don't control. Each creature you control deals 1 damage to that creature. What's beautiful about that is that often we have a lot of creatures, so often this just gets rid of a creature. Also, the case gets solved when you attack with 3 or more creatures, and then once it's solved, creatures you control get +1/+0, which is another anthem and a way to pump up these creatures and make these really cheap, kind of poopy creatures very good. We're also playing 4 Sheltered by Ghosts, again as removal. It is a 2-mana aura. We enchant a creature you control, and when it enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghosts leaves the battlefield. And the enchanted creature gets +1/+0, has lifelink and ward 2. So main deck hate for these aggressive decks, already very good in this format. The red-based decks are insane, but also it gets things out of the way so that we can jam. It allows us to race other aggressive decks and pumps up the creature it's on, which is relevant, especially if it's like an evasive creature or something, or a big creature like Knight Errant. As far as the sideboard goes, we're playing 2 Destroy Evil, both as enchantment hate and as like shieldred hate and stuff. We're playing 1 Split Up. Split Up is really good in the mirror match, especially after they convoke for a whole bunch, or really against these aggressive decks that are going to be attacking and we're kind of racing against. Any deck that we race against, we want to be siding Split Up. Playing 2 Disdainful Stroke for these big mana decks like Domain. 2 Protect the Negotiators, mostly for slower decks that have cards that are a really big deal, like Sunfall or Split Up or Temporary Lockdown, that we need to be countering or we just lose. Playing a Lithomantic Barrage, mostly for the Dimir deck. Being able to take out those creatures for 1 mana is super relevant. And then we're playing 4 Torch the Tower, mostly for these aggressive decks, also really good against Mosso Dread Knight, and there's a lot of applications for Torch the Tower here, especially since we often have the artifact to be able to sacrifice to bargain, which is not true for a lot of Torch the Tower decks. So this is a Jeskai Convoke deck, and let's look at the sideboard. Destroy Evil is 4 creatures with toughness 4 or greater. I'm thinking like demons or shieldred, but also really good against enchantments. Split Up, we're playing mostly for other aggressive decks that are going to be have tapped creatures against us, or the mirror match if they're convoking. It can kind of get people. It's pretty awesome. We're playing 2 Disdainful Stroke for these domain decks or board wipes or things like that. We're playing 4 Protect the Negotiators, mostly to protect ourselves against board wipes. Or if you know the opponent's deck has cards that are just insane against us. We have to remember these 4 Protect the Negotiators kind of dilutes our primary game plan, so it's really important to understand that if we're bringing that card in, it needs to be for like a really good reason. Lithomantic Barrage, mostly for the Dimir and the white deck, but it's just like a solid card, decent in the mirror match too. And then we're playing Torch the Tower for these aggressive decks, but also really good against the enduring cards because it exiles and makes it so they can't come back. So the most popular deck in Standard is Dimir Midrange. Against Dimir Midrange, we are bringing in Lithomantic Barrage. We are bringing in Torch the Tower. The cool part about Torch the Tower, specifically in this deck too, is that we have a lot of artifacts to bargain. So we can deal 3 damage really, really often. So we can deal Enduring Curiosity reasonably easily. So the big thing here is I'm not a giant fan of Sheltered by Ghosts because they run a reasonable amount of removal. They have to tap out to do it, but like it'd be kind of devastating if we Sheltered by Ghost something. And then we're just going to bring out 2 Clockwork Percussionists because it's sort of the flex slot in the deck. This is how I sideboard against Dimir. The second most popular deck is the Golgari Midrange deck. Against Golgari Midrange, we're bringing in Destroy Evils so that we can get rid of those really big blockers like either Demon or Shieldred. And then we're really looking at cards in our main deck that we don't want in our deck. And really the only card is Sheltered by Ghosts. Just because they have a bunch of removal, we just can't afford to use that card. So then I kind of alternate between Torch the Tower and Protect the Negotiators. The 2 Protect the Negotiators is solid if you're really worried about Harvester of Misery, where Torch the Tower is really good if you want to get rid of these cheap creatures that are looking to block you. I think going 1-1 is totally fine, but so this is how I sideboard against Golgari Midrange. The third most popular deck is Gruul Prowess, and we're going to be sideboarding the same as this deck. Again, the Mono Red Prowess deck, which is the 6th most popular deck, and the Boros Mice deck, which is the 8th most popular deck. So this is for all of those 3 decks. Against those decks, we're bringing in Split Up because they're going to be attacking a bunch and we can kind of get them. We're bringing in Torch the Tower. as that creature removal. And then we're going to be bringing out some of these weaker creatures. Shelter by Ghost is disgusting because it gives lifelink. I think Resolute Reinforcements is probably our worst card besides that. So we're going to shave on that. And this is how I sideboard against those 3 red decks. The 4th most popular deck is Jeskai Convoke / aggro, the mirror match. It's also good against the Azorius Convoke deck, so we're going to be sideboarding similarly with both. I'm a fan of bringing in Split Up because you can kind of get them after they do their Convoke stuff. Lithamanic Barrage is solid. Torch the Tower is pretty good. I don't think Sheltered by Ghosts is super worth it because there's plenty of removal and we're looking for cheaper removal or literal board wipes. And then we're going to shave on our flex slots. That's how I sideboard in the mirror match and against Azorius Convoke. The 5th most popular deck is Domain. Against Domain, we're bringing in these Destroy Evils. We're bringing in these Disdainful Strokes. We're bringing in Protect the Negotiators because they have board wipes. It is big boy scary. They have plenty of removal, especially board wipes. So Shelter by Ghost just kind of does nothing. We're going to shave on some flex slots as well. Whoops. And so that's how I sideboard against Domain. Now we already know how to sideboard against the 6th most popular deck because it's mono red prowess. We already know how to sideboard against the 7th most popular deck being Azorius Convoke. We talked about that when we talked about Jeskai. We know how to sideboard against the 8th most popular deck, Boros Mice. And so the 9th most popular deck is the Temur Floodcaller combo. Against Temur Floodcaller, Destroy Evil's solid. It can take out some creatures sometimes, but mostly being able to take out those enchantments we're super duper worried about. Lithamanic Barrage takes out most of the creatures. And I'm a fan of Torch the Tower against nearly all of the creatures as well. I like Shelter by Ghost as a removal spell against this deck because it's really important we remove the creatures in general, and they don't have a ton of removal themselves. So we just kind of are going to bring out our flex slots. And then because we're bringing out so many creatures and not bringing in any, we're going to shave on these payoffs as well. So this is how I sideboard against the Temur Floodcaller combo. And then the 10th most popular deck is the Mono White Control deck. Mono White tokens, whatever you want to call it. We're going to be bringing out Destroy Evil. They have a bunch of really scary enchantments, also Beza and that stuff. We're bringing in Disdainful Stroke for big, scary, like board wipes, Sunfall, all that stuff. Same thing with Protect the Negotiators. And then we got to take out this removal. Removal just generally isn't that good unless it's like very cheap and always gets rid of the stuff. And so this is how I sideboard against Mono White. So these are the non-flex slots in Jeskai aggro. These are the cards you pretty much have to play when you're playing the deck. These 51 cards in the main deck and these 7 cards in the sideboard, which means there are 9 flex slots in the main deck and 8 flex slots in the sideboard. So what do we play in those slots? Well, these are the options for our flex slots. So of these 18 cards, you're going to select 9 for the main deck. And of these 18 cards in the sideboard, you're going to select 8. So let's talk about these cards. So you're going to select 3 of these lands. Any of these lands, they kind of depend on what list you look at. It's pretty feels random depending on what land is selected. Really, you want to be playing your colors or be cutting one of these 3 colored lands for a Mirrex. Mirrex being able to pay 3 mana to create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1. The big thing here is that it's an artifact, so it can be the target of Gleeful Demolition, but also it's just another creature, and it can fix mana the turn Mirrex comes on the battlefield. I'm not sure if it's totally worth it cutting one of these colored lands, but it totally could be, depending on what you want to cut. I don't think it really matters. Seachrome Coast notably doesn't enter untapped after turn 3, assuming you hit all your land drops. So I'm not sure why decks would cut that, especially since it's unconditional in early turns, and with aggressive decks being so good right now. But those are the 3 options to cut. So that leaves 6 more cards as far as flex slots go in the main deck. You could pick 2 Clockwork Percussionists as a 1 mana 1/1 with haste. It's an artifact, notably. When Clockwork Percussionist dies, exile the top card of your library. You may play it till the end of your next turn. This card's pretty good because it allows you to dig deeper after you Gleeful Demolition. It also can apply a little bit of pressure the turn it comes out, and it's hard to block because you get to dig deeper when it dies. You can play 2 Torch the Tower if you're really worried about the aggressive decks. Just additional removal isn't that bad. Torch the Tower just also happens to be decent against decks that are looking to block us, like Golgari, for example. Case of the Gateway Express, we could play the 4th case. This is just mostly removal. When it enters the battlefield, choose target creature you don't control. Each creature you control deals 1 damage to that creature. And then we can solve it if we attack with 3 or more creatures this turn. And when it's solved, creatures you control get +1/+0 till end of turn. So this is really good because it's removal on one side and then it pumps our creatures on the other, which is exactly what this deck is attempting to do, which is why we're already playing 3 as far as non-flex slots go. We're playing 1 Sheltered by Ghosts already, but we could play up to an entire playset. Sheltered by Ghosts is a 2-mana enchantment aura. You can enchant a creature you control. When Sheltered by Ghosts enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghosts leaves the battlefield. So it's a O-ring effect, essentially, for creatures. Enchant a creature gets +1/+0, has lifelink, and ward 2. This is very, very good against the aggressive decks, mostly for like the lifelink and also getting rid of one of their creatures and then having to point a burn spell at this creature and pay extra mana to get rid of it. But generally good against decks that are playing a lot of creatures, maybe not have a lot of removal for us, but really we want it for the aggressive decks. War Leader's Call we could play as a 2 of as a 3-mana anthem that says whenever a creature you control enters, War Leader's Call deals 1 damage to each opponent. It's just really solid. I think the reason this is getting cut from a lot of decks is that it doesn't do anything on its own, but when War Leader's Call is good, it is absolutely excellent and can give you some reach after you've stopped attacking. We could play 2 Painter's Studio Defaced Gallery. Painter's Studio is a 3-mana room or door. When you unlock this door, exile the top 2 cards to your library. You may play them till the end of your next turn. Or a 2-mana door. Whenever you attacking creatures you control get +1/+0 till end of turn. So it's effectively an anthem for 2 mana on one side, and on the other side we can dig deeper. The issue is, again, it doesn't do too much totally on its own. It doesn't remove, it isn't a threat in and of itself. It's just an anthem effect and a dig effect. And then we can play 2 Mockingbird. Is a 1 blue and X is a 1/1 bird bard with flying. You may have Mockingbird enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield with mana value less than or equal to the amount of mana spent to cast Mockingbird, except it's a bird in addition to its other type and it has flying. This is good because you can copy things that have enter the battlefield effects that are very good. So I'm thinking mostly Imidane's Recruiter, but copying something like Resolute Reinforcements to get multiple creatures to then convoke more or whatever is also very, very solid. You're going to be selecting 3 of these 4 lands and then 6 of these other cards to join the non-flex slots in the main deck. As far as the sideboard goes, we have 8 slots. We could pick 2 Get Lost just as a pretty unconditional removal. Creature Enchantment Planeswalker at instant speed. We don't really care that they get map tokens because we're the aggressive deck. We could play Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. When Rest in Peace enters, exile all graveyards. If a card or token would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. We've already talked about Sheltered by Ghosts, but really it's for the aggressive decks, and you should probably be playing the playset in the 75, whether it be between the main deck or the sideboard. 2 Split Up. Split Up is pretty good, especially against the other aggressive decks or other Convoke decks, because if they're attacking, their creatures are going to be tapped. You untap and then play Split Up and say tapped creatures. It can very often be a one-sided board wipe. Disdainful Stroke for non-split up board wipes and like the Overlords and stuff. Protect Negotiators, mostly for board wipes. People are leaning more towards Protect Negotiators because Split Up is very good against us specifically, because we're going to be convoking and attacking as much as possible, and we tap our creatures at sorcery speed. So having Protect the Negotiators to protect our creatures is super important. Lithomantic Barrage for problematic creatures, or I guess Planeswalkers that are white or blue. Torture Tower we've already talked about, mostly for aggressive decks or really decks that are looking to block with toughness 2 or 3. And then 2 Obliterating Bolt. Obliterating Bolt deals 4 damage to target creature or Planeswalker. If that creature or Planeswalker would die this turn, exile it instead. Just a 2-mana card, get more things out of the way. Particularly good against Overlords and things like Zur and stuff too. But you're going to select 8 of these cards to join our non-flex slots in the sideboard. And then once you have taken 9 of these 18 main deck flex slots and 8 of these 18 sideboard flex slots, you have created your very own but stock version of Jeskai Convoke. First off, remember that Novice Inspector makes a clue token, and that clue token does not require tapping it to activate it, which means you can use the clue to activate Warden of the Inner Skies ability and then still be able to crack the clue to draw a card. That being said, remember, if you plan on cracking the clue to draw a card and you have a Warden of the Inner Skies, if it's possible, make sure you tap it to activate Warden before you crack it. Often, Jeskai Convoke players can get a little tunnel visioned off of Gleeful Demolition
really only treating it as a destroy your own artifact and get 3 1/1s. But remember, you can target your opponent's artifacts as well, and they don't even get the 1/1s. So it's main deck artifact hate. I don't know in what matchups that would be totally relevant, but it's important to remember. And then lastly, remember you're playing blue for counter magic. And the biggest reason you're playing blue for counter magic is to make sure you don't get wiped. This deck has a little bit of staying power, but not as much as other aggro decks, to be totally honest, because the deck's kind of comboing with itself. And so assuming you already have a decent board state and you have the option of advancing your board or leaving Protect the Negotiators up against a deck that you know has board wipes, just leave the Protect the Negotiators up, apply that pressure, make sure you don't get wiped and lose the game. Like, I've seen so many people just get greedy, tap out for no reason, just to advance their board and then die. And that's awful, so don't do that. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.